Hey, my name's ShawNshawN. I sell art on ShawNshawN.co and specials on eBay. Today we're going to review Let Him Go. So this is a movie by Thomas Besucha. He's also the writer, so you have that nice connection between the writer and director. That can turn out really well or really badly. It could be badly in the sense that if you wrote a piece of crap, you're going to direct a piece of crap. But if you wrote a really good script, you're going to, kind of direct it. You have that lack of editing between the original script probably to the story. The time is 1 hour and 54 minutes. It's kind of a drama crime, so you kind of need a little bit of space to let those characters breathe. Versus say an action film might be 1.5 hours. Actors are Kevin Costner as George Blackledge, this grandfather kind of figure, ex-sheriff. His wife is Diane Lane Margaret Blackledge, who is also a horse trainer previously. You have Leslie Manley is Blanche Weeboy, kind of this arch villain character. Kaylee Carter is Lorna Blackledge, the daughter-in-law of the Blackledges, who has a son. And Will Brittain is Donnie Weeboy, who marries Lorna and kind of ends up taking her away. So the story is, the grandmother, Margaret, is helping raise Lorna's kid together at their house, and why they kind of strive to get together, living in the same farm together because their son is there. And they all get along pretty well, more or less. The mother is kind of a little bit icy with the daughter-in-law, but generally okay. The grandmother bonds really well with the boy, obviously. And then tragedy strikes where her husband falls off a horse and he breaks his neck on the rocks and he dies, unfortunately. And so she's kind of struggling. So what does she do? She marries this new guy, Donnie Weeboy, and they move in town. And one day the grandmother's kind of going about town and she sees the father kind of hit the boy and hit the mother, and just totally unprovoked, just total asshole basically. And she's like, oh my god, what is this? She goes over to stop probably in the next week or two to go see, hey, what's up, kind of check out things are, maybe confront Donnie. And she goes to the apartment, and the apartment's been vacated. She's like, what happened? And they're like, oh, they left. And where did they go? They're like, oh, I don't know. They went somewhere, North Dakota, right? And they're like, oh my god. So the grandmother's determined to go see the son again, make sure he's okay, maybe try to take custody of him because she's afraid of this abusive relationship. So she packs the car, she's ready to go, and the grandfather's like, what are you doing? Are you gonna even ask me if you're gonna go or not? So he joins along, and then he finds that she packed a pistol, and she's like, what are you bringing a pistol for? And she's like, well, I don't want to be in a bad scenario. So he's like, all right, well, let's put it in the back of the car, be safe driving. Because if you carry in the front of the car, you could be arrested, but if you carry in the back of the car, it's kind of the safe way to transport a gun. And they wander over to North Dakota. They go to the first town, and they're kind of like, well, they might be over here. So they go to the next town. They go to the next town. There's like no one here. The Weeboys aren't really here. And they're like, oh, try this other guy. I think it's Will Weeboy. And they meet this Will Weeboy, and he's really strange. And, the grandfather's like, this guy doesn't check out. We really shouldn't get help from this guy. This guy isn't on the up and up. And the grandmother's like, no. He's the only connection we have to the family, so let's try to work with him. And Will's like, oh, I'll call my family. Oh yeah, we'll have supper tonight, right? So he's like, all right, show up at 4. So they go, okay, they show up at 4. They drive down this desolate road off the highway, and it's way out in the middle of nowhere. And they go, and there's this huge kind of mansion, and inside is 3 or 4 more Weeboy boys, and kind of the matriarch, who is a Blanche Weeboy. And her boys are kind of like mama boys, basically, but they're brutal and they're abusive. And they're abusive because she's abusive. So that's kind of the turn of the story where you're like, oh my god, this person's even worse. He's like the real villain of the story. And they go in, Lorna shows up with the boy, and the grandmother's like, oh, thank god. And there's a lot of tense scene before this. So the mother finally shows up, and she hugs the son, and then the other grandmother, Blanche, is like, all right, off to bed. And she's like, we just got here, right? Literally 5 minutes, she's like, screw you, get the hell out of here, right? She doesn't care what's gonna go on. So the grandmother's like totally distraught. And they go in town and like, oh my god, what are we gonna do? It was just really awkward in that situation. They got along really poorly with the grandmother and the boys, so they got off completely to the wrong foot. But obviously they're trying to go into this abusive family, and they're like, oh my god, what is this? They meet Lorna, and she has a day job at this department store, and they meet her and say, hey, can you meet us for lunch? All right, I meet you for lunch. but not now at my job. She's like, yeah, that's fine. And they meet her for lunch. They're like, are you sure you want to stay with this guy? He seems abusive. And she's like, well, you know, I set up here. And she's like, well, we can take custody. And she's like, what do you mean? I'm the mother. It's like, well, you can come back and live with us. And, you know, she's kind of tossing and turning. And she's like, all right, she agrees to it, right? So she'll meet them at 2 a.m. at their hotel room. So they're staying at the hotel room. But then instead of her showing up, all the boys show up, the grandmother, and then it goes south from there. But I'll leave that as it is. It has a really good build-up. So yeah, the story is this nice tragedy, you know, compounded with another tragedy. So you have the tragedy of the son dying, and then the tragedy of the mother marrying this abusive stepdad. And then even worse, they move back in with a family who's even more abusive. So it's just kind of this downtrodden. At the same time, you have this nice parallel between people that can manage horses and people that can't manage horses. So the Blackledges are, she's really good with horses, so she has this really special touch with animals and she knows how to manage them. So it's kind of the side of, it's symbol of good human nature. And they also meet an Indian boy and he also manages horses, and the horses ran away. So it might be suggested it ran away maybe from the Wee Boy ranch, who knows? But the Wee Boys don't have any animals. They don't know how to manage anything. So they're kind of abusive towards animals. They're abusive towards humans. And so it's kind of this nice symbolism, the horse of good nature versus bad nature of human. You also have the story is set in the 60s. You could probably shoot this today, but with the internet and your phone and, you know, it just wouldn't be as isolating it was pre-internet era. So these guys, they barely have radios, maybe a little bit of CBs here and there, but they really don't have any connection. Everyone's cut off. You only have the telephone, hardline. No one has an answering machine, so you really just call. You don't know who you're going to get. You don't know if you're going to reach through. You don't know who called if you missed a call. So there's really interesting, you know, isolated atmosphere between Montana and also where they come from, which, well, in Montana and worse in North Dakota, it's even colder there, supposedly. I think it's about the same, but I think North Dakota can be a little further north, so even more isolated, more desolate type of lifestyle. And you can see the brutality of how the weather and isolationism has really shaped the Wee Boys to be this really tight family clan, but very abusive at the same time. You know, some of the Wee Boys have ran away and tried to go to a better life, and the grandmother kind of reels them back in, right? So it's pretty interesting, you know, how the formation of Blanche Wee Boy and how she kind of beats your boys, teach them how to be real men, to be able to survive this harsh wilderness life in North Dakota. You also have kind of this in-between story of an Indian who had run away from an Indian school. So back in the day when they had the reservation system, they still have the reservations obviously, but they used to ship the children off to Indian schools and try to make them more Western. They'd Christianize them, teach them about Western culture. And then when they went back to their tribe, they didn't even speak their language, they didn't fit in, and you kind of really broke the spirit of the tribe. You know, they thought it was a good at that time. I think probably by the 70s, probably they got rid of this. But you kind of have this legacy system which really broke the Indian culture down completely, trying to force them onto the reservation, try to force them to be Western every generation. And so it has this nice parallel between, you know, how people get abused in different systems, and the Indian has this horse that ran away, so maybe the horse is from some family that abused horses, right? So it's kind of this nice parallel story as well. A little bit of touch of PC culture here, but you know, in the 60s that would have been a legit story, so just adds a little bit further depth to the story. Overall, I think it's a pretty good story. It's pretty straightforward. You know, there's not much more to say to it than that. Great character builds, especially with the flip of, you know, the grandmother Blanche being the arch villain of the story. It isn't just the boys. The mother is actually the abusive one, so they have some really great scenes there where they had this confrontation in a hotel room, and you know, the mother just starts slapping her boys around like nonchalantly. You're like, holy crap, dude, this lady's crazy, right? But yeah, it has a really nice showdown between the two different families, and you know, because of the grit of Margaret, ends up costing her everything to save the boy, but you know, at the end of the day, I guess it's worth it, because you don't want to have this terrible family raising the kid and just destroying this kid. So it's kind of like this rescue operation. A lot of nice, you know, parallels of the 60s, and just has a nice feel to the story. I mean, it's not a feel-good story. You're gonna feel like, damn, dude, that's kind of depressing. I didn't want to really see it, but that was the only story they really had out this week, so I'm like, all right, I'll go see it. It's gonna be a well-done story, you could tell, but you know, to see a depressing story is like, I don't know, you know, like, especially if you kind of grow up with a little bit of abuse, you really want to see more abuse. It's kind of like, I don't know, that type of story. But it was either this or see, you know, War Against Grandpa, which I think is just totally dumb. It'll be a fun movie, but to critique of War Against Grandpa, I don't know. But I should probably see that, because that's probably going to be a fun movie. So I'd rate it pretty good if you are in good spirits. I wouldn't see it if you're in bad spirits. It's just going to make you feel worse. If you'd like to see more, you can subscribe below. And hope to see you in the next movie review. Thanks for watching, guys.